In 1963, a coal miner in Harlan County, Kentucky, walked home from the night shift with a leather sap in one pocket and a roll of pennies in the other. He never started trouble, but trouble knew better than to start with him. Most of what he carried is now illegal in at least 30 states. Number 14 on this list will shock you, because police departments actually issued them to officers before banning civilians from owning the same thing. And number 3 was so common in the mountains that general stores sold them next to the chewing tobacco. Before we start, subscribe, because once you see what your grandfather considered everyday carry, you will never look at a coat pocket the same way again. Let us count them down. Number 25, the roll of pennies. Every Appalachian man who ever walked a dirt road after dark knew the value of a fist wrapped around a tight roll of pennies. Not nickels, not quarters, pennies. The copper roll fit the palm perfectly, adding mass and rigidity to a closed fist without looking like anything more than pocket change. A man could walk into a company store, a church, or a county courthouse with a roll of pennies and nobody blinked. It was money. But clench that roll tight and throw a punch, and the physics changed entirely. The roll prevented the fingers from collapsing on impact, distributing force across solid copper instead of fragile knuckles. A man could break a jaw without breaking his hand. By the 1950s, this was so well understood in mining towns that foremen would confiscate rolls of coins at the pit entrance on payday weekends. The roll of pennies was the first weapon that was not a weapon, the original Appalachian loophole, and every grandfather knew it by instinct. Number 24, the heavy belt buckle. Before mall stores sold decorative buckles as fashion, Appalachian men wore solid brass or cast iron buckles that weighed half a pound or more. A man could whip that belt off in 2 seconds flat, wrap the leather end around his fist, and let that buckle swing free. The physics were devastating. 3 feet of leather gave the buckle velocity, and that concentrated mass hit with force that no bare fist could match. Miners, loggers, and railroad men all carried the same weapon, disguised as the thing holding up their trousers. Children watched their fathers remove those belts at the end of the day, the heavy clank against the dresser as familiar as the creak of the porch swing. In some mountain towns, certain buckles were passed down through families, the brass worn smooth by decades of handling. No law could outlaw a belt, and no man who wore one was ever truly unarmed. Number 23, the corn knife. This flat, heavy blade with a squared-off tip was designed for chopping corn stalks at harvest. Every farm family owned at least one. Hung on a nail by the back door, the corn knife was grabbed instinctively when a noise came from the hen house, or when a stranger appeared on the property after dark. The blade was typically 18 inches long, heavier than a machete, and required no sharpening to do damage. By the 1940s, Appalachian hardware stores sold them for less than $1, and most families had 2 or 3 scattered across outbuildings and barns. It was never classified as a weapon because it was a tool, as ordinary as a hammer. But anyone who has ever held one knows exactly what it could do when the situation changed from farming to something else entirely. Number 22, the blackjack. A flat piece of leather sewn around a lead weight, small enough to disappear in a coat pocket, heavy enough to end a confrontation with one swing. Blackjacks were standard equipment for coal mine security guards, company men, and anyone who worked the rough side of the mountains. A good blackjack was made by a local saddle maker, the leather stitched tight with waxed thread, the lead molded to fit the pouch like it was born there. The weapon concentrated enormous force into a small striking surface. One clean hit to the temple or behind the ear, and a man went down without a sound. By the 1970s, blackjacks were banned in most states. But in the decades before that, they lived quietly in the coat pockets of men who worked dangerous jobs in dangerous places. Grandfathers who carried them rarely talked about why. The blackjack spoke for itself. Number 21st, the Arkansas toothpick. This was not a pocket knife. It was a double-edged dagger with a blade between 5 and 10 inches long, designed for one purpose that polite conversation never mentioned. Named for the state where Bowie knife culture ran deepest, the Arkansas toothpick became the gentleman's concealed blade throughout Appalachia. Slim enough to ride in a boot or inside a coat, the toothpick was carried by lawyers, preachers, and shopkeepers alongside the miners and loggers you would expect. Several states outlawed concealed carry of double-edged blades before the Civil War, making the toothpick one of the earliest banned self-defense weapons in American history. Yet they kept appearing in estate sales and cigar boxes across the mountains well into the 1970s. A grandfather might never mention the one wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of his dresser drawer. But it was there. Number 20. The weighted walking stick. A man could carry a cane anywhere, anytime, and nobody questioned it. Appalachian craftsmen knew this and exploited it beautifully. They would hollow out a hickory or oak walking stick, pour molten lead into the head, and seal it with a carved knob. The result looked like any ordinary stick, but it swung like a sledgehammer. Some were fitted with a lead-filled brass cap. Others had a core of iron rod running the length of the shaft. A weighted stick could shatter bone, and a man leaning on one at a crossroads store looked like nothing more than somebody resting his legs. Walking sticks were also carved from ironwood or Osage orange, woods so dense they sank in water. These natural heavyweights needed no modification. One clean swing across the forearm would discourage anything short of a grizzly bear. Every grandfather had one standing by the front door. Most people assumed it was decorative. Number 19, the Palm SAP. Smaller and more discreet than the blackjack, the palm sap was a flat leather pouch filled with lead shot. It was designed to be held flat against the palm and concealed completely by a closed hand. A man could shake your hand with a palm sap in his grip, and you would never know until he hit you with it. The striking surface was barely 3 inches across, concentrating all that weight into a devastating slap. Sheriff's deputies in rural Appalachian counties carried palm saps into the 1960s, and many kept them long after departments officially banned their use. The craft of making a good palm sap was passed between leather workers in small mountain towns. The best ones were thin enough to sit in a shirt pocket and heavy enough to make a grown man see stars. Number 18, the sock full of rocks. When nothing else was available, every boy in Appalachia knew that a wool sock filled with creek rocks became a weapon in about 10 seconds. Swing it overhead, and that sock became a flexible flail, the rocks shifting and settling with each rotation, building momentum. The sock absorbed some of the impact on the wielder's hand, while delivering concentrated punishment to whatever it struck. This was the weapon of last resort, the thing a man grabbed when he heard the dogs barking at 2 a.m. and could not find anything else in the dark. It required no skill, no training, no money, just a sock and a creek bed. Every hollow in the mountains had both in abundance. Number 17, the push dagger. Also called a punch knife, this small blade sat between the fingers with the handle crossing the palm, turning a fist into something far more dangerous. Push daggers were popular with riverboat gamblers and then migrated into the mountains with returning veterans who had seen similar designs overseas. The blade was usually only 3 inches long, but the mechanics of the weapon meant every ounce of punching force drove that point forward. They were banned early and often. Tennessee outlawed them before 1880, but the design was so simple that any blacksmith could forge one from scrap iron in an afternoon. Grandfathers who carried push daggers never called them that. They called them by a dozen local names that kept the weapon hidden in plain language. Number 16, the razor strop. Every man who shaved with a straight razor owned a leather strop for sharpening, and every man who owned a strop knew it doubled as a weapon. 2 feet of thick leather, sometimes with a canvas backing, swung fast enough to raise welts through a wool shirt. The strop hung in the bathroom, the barber shop, the back porch. It was discipline, grooming, and self-defense rolled into one strip of cowhide. In some mountain communities, a man known to be handy with a strop earned a wide berth. The sound of leather cracking against leather was warning enough. When straight razors faded from daily use in the 1960s and the 1970s, the strop went with them, and another quiet weapon disappeared from American homes. Number 15, the horseshoe. Carried in a coat pocket or nailed above the door for luck, the horseshoe was also a brutally effective weapon when slipped over the knuckles. The curved iron fit the hand naturally, and the weight turned any punch into something closer to being hit with a hammer. Blacksmiths in every Appalachian town produced horseshoes by the hundred, and worn-out shoes cost nothing. A man might carry one for luck, for weight, or for reasons he never explained. Try telling a deputy sheriff that the horseshoe in your pocket was a good luck charm. In some counties, they believed you. In others, they smiled and told you to leave it at home next Saturday night. Number 14, the leather sap. Heavier than the palm sap and shaped like a beaver tail, the leather sap was the weapon of choice for lawmen and outlaws alike. 8 to 12 inches of flat leather was wrapped around a spring steel shank with a lead-filled striking end. The spring gave it whip action, multiplying the force of even a casual swing. Police departments across Appalachia issued leather saps to deputies through the 1950s. Officers carried them in rear pockets, readily accessible and devastatingly effective. Then, one by one, departments banned them for excessive force. The same weapon that had been standard issue became a felony to possess. Grandfathers who had carried saps as deputies quietly tucked them into dresser drawers. The sap did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked too well. Number 13, the Barlow knife. Not a weapon in the traditional sense, the Barlow was the universal pocket knife of Appalachia, carried by virtually every man and boy from the age of 8 onward. The single blade folded into a teardrop-shaped bone or wood handle, sturdy enough for a lifetime of whittling, skinning, and cutting twine. In self-defense, the Barlow was slow to open and modest in size. But it was always there, always sharp, always ready. Mark Twain gave one to Tom Sawyer. Abraham Lincoln carried one. In mountain communities, a man without a Barlow was a man without his hands. When blade length laws tightened in the 1980s and the 90s, the Barlow's 3.5-inch blade suddenly crossed the legal line in some jurisdictions. The knife that had been as common as a wallet became contraband. General stores that had sold them for generations pulled them from the counter. Number 12, the hat pin. This entry belongs to the grandmothers. In an era when women wore hats secured by steel pins up to 12 inches long, every woman in Appalachia carried a concealed weapon, whether she knew it or not. A hat pin could puncture leather, and women who traveled alone on mountain roads learned to grip one defensively. By 1910, several cities had actually passed ordinances limiting hat pin length after a series of self-defense incidents made national news. Women fought back. They argued the pin was fashion, not a weapon. Legislatures did not see it that way. The hat pin panic of the early 20th century was one of the first attempts to outlaw a woman's right to carry anything capable of self-defense. When hat fashions changed, the pin disappeared, and with it went one of the most elegant weapons ever disguised as an accessory. Number 11. The singletree club. A singletree was the wooden crossbar that connected a draft horse to a plow or wagon. When a singletree broke, and they broke often, the hickory bar became one of the finest clubs available. About 3 feet long, curved slightly, fitted with iron hardware at each end, the broken singletree was dense, balanced, and devastatingly effective. Farmers kept broken singletrees by the barn door, the way suburban families keep baseball bats by the bed. Nobody questioned it. It was scrap. It was junk. It was also the reason no sensible person broke into a mountain farmhouse after dark. When mechanized farming replaced horses in the 1950s and 1960s, singletrees vanished from barns, and another improvised weapon quietly left the Appalachian arsenal. Number 10. The knuckle duster. Brass knuckles in their purest form. 4 finger holes cast from brass, iron, or even carved from hardwood by craftsmen who understood that the human fist was fragile, but the human spirit was not. Appalachian blacksmiths forged custom sets that fit individual hands, some with pointed studs, others smooth and rounded for courthouse towns, where a man might need to explain himself. Brass knuckles were banned in waves, state by state, starting in the late 1800s. Yet they remained the most commonly confiscated weapon in rural southern jails well into the 1970s. Every pawn shop had a cigar box of them under the counter. Every flea market vendor knew where to find a set. The knuckle duster was the weapon that refused to die, no matter how many laws were written against it. Number 9. The loaded cane. A step beyond the weighted walking stick, the loaded cane was purpose-built for combat. Some contained a sword blade that drew from the shaft. Others hid a spring-loaded spike in the ferrule. The most common Appalachian version was simpler, a lead-filled head on a flexible bamboo or rattan shaft that whipped forward with shocking speed. Loaded canes were sold openly through mail-order catalogs into the 1920s, advertised alongside patent medicines and farming equipment. Sears and Roebuck carried them. When concealed weapons laws expanded, the loaded cane fell into a legal gray area. It was a cane. It was also a weapon. Courts argued about it for decades. Meanwhile, grandfathers kept carrying them because a man with a limp and a cane attracted sympathy, not suspicion. Number 8. The slungshot. A slungshot is a lead ball or a heavy stone wrapped in braided leather or rope, swung from a short handle. Slungshots were the most commonly banned weapon in 19th century America, outlawed in more states than brass knuckles and blackjacks combined. The reason was simple. They were lethally effective, required no skill, and could be made from materials found in any barn. Appalachian versions used smooth river stones wrapped in rawhide, often braided with the same skill used for horsetack. A slungshot swung with intent could crack a skull. The laws against them were harsh. Possession alone could mean jail time in most states by 1900. Yet they kept turning up, in coat pockets, toolboxes, and the bottom of fishing creels. The slungshot was Appalachia's most forbidden weapon, which is precisely why so many grandfathers owned one. Number 7. The switchblade. When the blade sprang open with the press of a button, every kid in America wanted one, and every legislature wanted to ban them. The Federal Switchblade Act of 1958 prohibited interstate sale and states piled on with their own restrictions. But in Appalachian towns where Italian, German, and Eastern European immigrants had settled near the mines, switchblades had been everyday pocket knives for decades. The automatic action was not about menace, it was about convenience. A man with one free hand and the other hand holding a rope, a bridle, or a lunch pail could open his knife without fumbling. The ban turned a practical tool into a criminal object overnight. Grandfathers who had carried switchblades since boyhood suddenly possessed contraband. Many kept carrying them anyway, buried deep enough in a coat pocket that no deputy would bother looking. Number 6. The tire thumper. Truckers carried short wooden or rubber clubs called tire thumpers, designed to test tire pressure by sound. In practice, the tire thumper lived under the truck seat and came out when situations at rest stops or loading docks turned ugly. The clubs were 12 to 18 inches long, weighted at the business end, and perfectly legal as commercial equipment. Appalachian men who drove coal trucks, timber rigs, and livestock haulers all kept thumpers within reach. When asked, it was a tire checker. When needed, it was something else entirely. No state ever successfully banned the tire thumper because no legislature could argue that checking your tires was illegal. Number 5. The buck knife on the belt. The Buck 110 folding hunter, introduced in 1964, became the defining knife of Appalachian manhood. Carried in a leather sheath on the belt, the buck was visible, respectable, and sharp enough to field dress a deer. Every man in the mountains owned one or wanted to. The heavy brass bolsters and the satisfying click of the lockback made it feel substantial. For self-defense, the buck was slower than a switchblade, but far more socially acceptable. A man wearing a buck knife was a hunter, a woodsman, a working man. When zero-tolerance policies and tightening carry laws began targeting visible knives in the 1990s, the buck on the belt became the latest casualty. Men who had carried them daily for 30 years were suddenly told to leave them in the truck. Number 4. The Derringer. That tiny two-shot pistol, small enough to hide in a vest pocket, was the concealed carry weapon of the 19th century. In Appalachia, Derringers survived well past their era, tucked into coat pockets and boot tops by men who considered a full-sized revolver too conspicuous. Chambered in small calibers, the Derringer was a weapon of desperation, accurate only at arm's length and effective only if you made those 2 shots count. Pawn shops in mountain towns kept them in glass cases alongside pocket watches and wedding rings. A decent one cost $5 or $10 in the 1950s. When concealed, carry permits became mandatory and handgun laws tightened, the unlicensed Derringer in the coat pocket became a serious legal problem. But for decades before that, it was just what a cautious man carried when he walked to town on a Saturday night. Number 3. The bailing hook. A curved steel hook on a wooden handle designed for grabbing and moving hay bales. Every farm, every feed store, every barn in Appalachia had at least one hanging on a nail. The hook was sharp, sturdy, and fit the hand like it was made for gripping, which it was. In the wrong circumstances, or the right ones depending on your perspective, the bailing hook was a terrifying close-quarters weapon. Nobody questioned a man carrying one near a barn. But the bailing hook that rode in the truck cab or hung by the front door served a purpose that had nothing to do with hay. General stores sold them for less than $2, right next to the chewing tobacco, just like we said. No license, no background check, no questions asked. Number 2, the straight razor. Every man owned one. Every man sharpened one on Sunday morning before church. And every man in Appalachia understood that the straight razor folded in his pocket was the most dangerous weapon he carried, more lethal than the pocket knife, faster than the blackjack, quieter than the Derringer. The razor required no modification, no concealment, no excuse. It was grooming. It was civilized. It was also 4 inches of surgical steel honed to an edge that could split a hair lengthwise. In mining camps, lumber towns, and railroad depots, the straight razor settled disputes that fists could not finish. When safety razors and disposable blades took over in the 1960s, the straight razor retreated from bathroom shelves, and the most common weapon in Appalachian history became a collector's item. Number 1. The pocket knife your grandfather gave you, not the switchblade, not the buck knife. The simple 2-blade pocket knife with the bone handle, the one he pressed into your palm when you turned 7 or 8, and he told you not to tell your mother. That knife was not about self-defense. It was about identity. It said you were old enough to be trusted, old enough to whittle, to cut fishing line, to open feed sacks, and yes, old enough to protect yourself if the world required it. Every man in Appalachia carried one. Every boy dreamed of the day he would receive his. The pocket knife was the first and last weapon on this list because it was never really a weapon at all. It was a promise between generations, a piece of steel that said, "You are one of us now." That is the list. 25 things your grandfather carried without thinking twice, most of which would get you arrested today. The mountains made men practical, and practical men carried what worked. If your grandfather had a favorite that we missed, drop it in the comments. And if you have still got his pocket knife in your dresser drawer, you already know everything this list tried to say.